The theatre loomed before Nicole, a forgotten relic standing in defiance of time. Its grand marquee, once glowing with the promise of entertainment, now hung in shambles, letters missing and barely clinging to the rusted frame. Vines crept up the brick facade, wrapping the building in nature's quiet embrace. She stood in the moonlight, taking a deep breath, feeling the thrill of exploration pulse through her veins. She had read about the theater in an old blog post, how it had been abandoned for decades after a fire in the late 70s left it structurally unsound. It was deemed too costly to repair, so it had been left to the elements. Its once vibrant walls now cloaked in dust and darkness. Nicole pulled her flashlight from her backpack and pushed open the heavy doors. They groaned in protest, as if unwilling to grant her passage. The scent of aged wood and mildew filled her nostrils, a stark contrast to the crisp night air outside. The grand foyer stretched before her, its once luxurious velvet carpets now moth-eaten and covered in layers of dust. Chandeliers, now missing most of their crystals, swayed slightly, responding to the movement of the air. She felt a shiver run down her spine, but pushed forward, her boots leaving light imprints in the dust as she stepped cautiously inside. She swept her flashlight beam across the peeling wallpaper and faded murals of past performances. She imagined what this place must have been like decades ago. People dressed in their finest attire, the hum of excitement in the air, the scent of perfume, and old paper programs filling the room. Now, only silence remained. The ticket booth stood empty, its glass cracked and fogged with age. She reached out, running her fingers over the worn wood of the counter. A stack of old, yellow tickets sat beneath a layer of dust, forgotten remnants of a time long gone. She picked one up and held it to the light. Admit one, the Phantom Waltz. A sudden noise made her freeze, a faint rustling somewhere in the shadows above. Her heart began to hammer in her chest. She turned, scanning the balconies with her flashlight, but the seats stood empty. Just the wind, she assured herself, but still, the feeling of being watched crept over her like a thick fog. Determined not to let her nerves get the best of her, she moved toward the grand auditorium. As she stepped through the arched entryway, her breath hitched. Rows upon rows of seats stretched out before her, all facing the darkened stage. The air was thick with history, as if the ghosts of past audiences still lingered, waiting for a show that would never begin. Nicole took a step forward, her boots brushing against something brittle. She looked down, old playbills, faded and curling at the edges. She crouched, picking one up carefully. The Phantom Waltz, it read, featuring a cast she had never heard of. She smiled, imagining what it must have been like when this place was alive with music and laughter. The silence pressed in on her, broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood. She turned toward the aisles, her fingers grazing the warm fabric of the seats as she moved down the rows. Each seat felt like a whisper of the past, a place where someone had once sat, waiting in anticipation. She made her way to the backstage area, her heart racing slightly as she passed beneath the heavy red curtain, now tattered and stained with age. The ropes and pulleys that once controlled the set pieces dangled lifelessly, swaying ever so slightly. She moved deeper, her flashlight flickering as it illuminated old dressing rooms, their mirrors cracked and their vanities covered in a thick layer of dust. One of the dressing rooms caught her attention. The nameplate on the door had long since faded, but as she stepped inside, She noticed the remnants of a performer's life left behind. A sequined dress draped over a chair, an old script open on the vanity, its pages brittle with time. A photograph lay beside it, the image faded and curling at the edges. It depicted a woman in costume, smiling brightly, her eyes full of life. Nicole traced a finger over the image, wondering who she had been. A noise from outside the room made her jump, a faint thud, as if something had been knocked over. Her flashlight flickered again and she swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. She moved cautiously toward the sound, stepping into a narrow hallway that led deeper into the theater. A storage room stood at the end, its door slightly ajar. She hesitated before pushing it open, revealing shelves lined with old props, painted masks, feathered hats, and antique lanterns. Nicole saw a figure standing in the corner, its form draped in a dust-covered costume. She let out a slow breath, and then she shook her head at herself for being startled. It was only a mannequin. She turned to leave, but then she noticed something on the floor. Footprints in the dust. Fresh footprints. Her stomach tightened. She wasn't alone. A faint whisper echoed through the space. Nicole's breath hitched. She swung her flashlight upward, scanning the balconies again. A chill crept over her skin as she stood frozen, straining to hear. It could have been the wind, but it had almost sounded like a voice. For a moment, she considered turning back, but curiosity, as always, won. She moved deeper, stepping between the aisles, her fingers grazing the backs of the seats as she passed. The silence pressed in on her, each step feeling heavier than the last. Another noise, this time closer. Her pulse quickened. She swung her flashlight toward the sound, the beam landing on the darkened curtains at the side of the stage. The fabric swayed slightly, as if disturbed by an unseen force. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She wanted to call out, but hesitated, unsure if she truly wanted an answer. Then, something moved, just beyond the curtain. A shadow flickered in the dim light. Nicole's grip on her flashlight tightened. She took a tentative step forward, her mind racing between rational explanations and the whisper of fear clawing at the edges of her thoughts. She reached out, her fingers brushing the heavy fabric. She hesitated for only a moment before pulling it back in one swift motion. The darkness beyond felt suffocating, and then a faint breath. Nicole stumbled back, her heart pounding against her ribs. The realization struck her hard and fast. She wasn't alone. Nicole gasped, her breath catching in her throat as she stumbled backward. The figure before her had emerged from the shadows with quiet, measured steps, his presence almost blending with the eerie stillness of the theater. The beam of her flashlight landed on his face. Young, probably in his late 20s, with dark tousled hair that looked like he had been nervously running his fingers through it. His eyes, deep and observant, flickered with mild amusement at her reaction. He held his hands up in an unspoken gesture of peace. "Whoa, hey," he said, his voice warm yet cautious. "Didn't mean to scare you." Nicole's pulse pounded in her ears. She tightened her grip on the flashlight, resisting the urge to bolt. "Well, congratulations," she said, her voice laced with lingering nerves. "You did a fantastic job at it." The stranger let out a small chuckle. "Yeah, I gathered that." He studied her for a moment before adding, "I wasn't expecting anyone else here." Nicole narrowed her eyes, still uncertain whether he was a harmless explorer like herself or something else entirely. "Neither was I," she admitted, taking a step back. "Who are you?" "Andrew." His posture remained relaxed, though he shifted his weight slightly, as if trying to reassure her that he wasn't a threat. "And you?" "Nicole." For a few moments, they stood in silence, sizing each other up. Andrew glanced around at their surroundings, the towering stage curtains, the cracked wooden flooring, the dust particles dancing in the dim light. "So," he finally said, gesturing to the theater, "I take it you're into exploring old places too." Nicole hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, there's something about abandoned places. The history, the mystery. It's like stepping into a forgotten story." Andrew's face lit up at her words. "Exactly," he said. "I always feel like these places still hold echoes of the past. Like the memories of the people who once filled them are just waiting to be uncovered." Nicole relaxed slightly at his enthusiasm. She had met other explorers before, but few seemed to appreciate the emotional weight of these places the way she did. "Most people think I'm crazy for doing this alone," she admitted. Andrew smirked. "Same. My friends think I have a death wish, but I don't know. Something about it just draws me in. There's a kind of quiet beauty in places like this." Nicole nodded, glancing around. "Yeah, this place must have been incredible in its prime." "Ever wonder what the last performance here was like?" Andrew mused, stepping toward the stage. The last applause, the last song. Nicole followed his gaze to the grand dust-covered seats. "I was actually thinking about that earlier," she admitted. "I found an old playbill for something called the Phantom Waltz." Andrew raised an eyebrow. "Seems fitting for a place like this." They wandered deeper into the backstage area together, their flashlights illuminating long-forgotten dressing rooms, tattered costumes, and crumbling set pieces. As they moved, they talked about their favorite places they had explored. Nicole had visited an abandoned amusement park once, where the Ferris wheel still stood, like a silent sentinel over the rustling remains of a carousel. Andrew shared a story about sneaking into an old railway station that had been shut down decades ago, the train still sitting eerily on the tracks, as if waiting for passengers who would never come. The more they talked, the more Nicole felt her wariness fading. Andrew wasn't just another trespasser looking for a cheap thrill. He understood. He saw these places the way she did, as something more than just crumbling walls and broken windows. Their conversation carried them into a large, dust-filled room that looked as though it had once been a rehearsal space. The ceiling was high, lined with exposed beams, and the walls were adorned with faded posters of past performances. In the center of the room, beneath a soft veil of moonlight filtering through a cracked window, sat an old grand piano. Nicole inhaled sharply. "Wow." Andrew stepped forward, running a hand over the dusty keys. "Now this," he murmured, "is something special." He pressed a single key. A soft, melancholic voice filled the silence, reverberating through the empty space. Nicole watched as his expression shifted, something almost reverent passing over his face. Then, without another word, he sat down and placed his hands on the keys. Andrew's fingers danced across the piano keys, the first few hesitant notes swelling into a soft, melancholic tune. Nicole stood beside him, watching in quiet awe as the music filled the empty space, bringing the theater to life for the first time in decades. The melody was haunting yet beautiful, echoing through the vast, hollow auditorium like a ghost's whispered lullaby. For a moment, she let herself close her eyes, allowing the sound to wash over her. It was strange how something so simple, just a few notes played on an old forgotten piano, could feel so powerful, as if it were speaking to her in ways words never could. "You play beautifully," she said softly when the last note faded into silence. Andrew glanced up at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Thanks. I used to take lessons as a kid. Haven't played in years, though." Nicole tilted her head. "Could have fooled me." He chuckled, running a hand over the dusty keys. "I don't know. Something about places like this makes you want to bring them back to life, even if just for a moment." Nicole nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. She slid onto the piano bench beside him, brushing dust off the wooden surface, before resting her arms on the edge. "So," she said, looking at him curiously, "what made you start exploring abandoned places?" Andrew leaned back slightly, considering her question. "I guess I've always been drawn to things left behind," he admitted. "I used to live near an old factory when I was a kid. It was fenced off, supposedly dangerous, but my friends and I would sneak in anyway. I remember finding an old workbench covered in tools, like someone had just walked away one day and never came back. It made me wonder, what happened? Why did people just leave?" Nicole listened intently, resting her chin on her hand. "That's exactly why I do this too. Every place has a story, even if we don't know all the details. And I love imagining what those stories might have been." Andrew grinned, glad to know I'm not the only one. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Nicole stood up and stretched. "Come on," she said, grabbing her flashlight. "We've only seen part of this place. There's got to be more to explore." Andrew smirked and followed her lead. "Lead the way." They ventured deeper into the theater, moving past the stage and into the backstage corridors. Their flashlights cast long shadows on the walls. As they walked past old dressing rooms, faded posters still clinging to the peeling wallpaper, Nicole stopped at one of the doors, brushing her fingers over the nameplate. The letters had worn away long ago, but she imagined an actress once standing here, adjusting her costume before stepping out into the spotlight. Andrew peered over her shoulder. "It's kind of sad, isn't it? All these people, their careers, their lives, just forgotten." Nicole nodded. "Yeah, but maybe we remember them, even just a little, by being here." He smiled at that. "I like that idea." They moved on, climbing a set of narrow stairs that led up to the balconies. The wooden steps creaked under their weight, but they held firm as they reached the top. From here they could see the entire theater, the vast rows of empty seats, the grand arch of the stage, the chandelier still clinging stubbornly to the ceiling despite its missing crystals. Nicole leaned against the railing, taking it all in. "I wonder if anyone else ever comes here," she mused. Andrew shrugged. "Maybe, but I'd like to think that this place was waiting for us." Nicole turned to look at him. "Waiting for us?" He chuckled. "I mean, think about it. You and I both happened to come here on the same night, at the same time. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Or maybe this place wanted to be remembered." Nicole smirked. "You sound like a storyteller." Andrew gave a half smile. "Maybe I am." They stood there for a moment longer, neither in a rush to leave. Finally, Andrew turned to her. "So, what's the next place on your list?" Nicole raised an eyebrow. "Next place?" "Yeah," he said. "You don't strike me as the type to stop at just one adventure." She grinned. "I've a few places in mind." Andrew nodded, slipping his hands into his pockets. "Then maybe we explore them together. Nicole hesitated, but only for a second. Something about this night, about meeting Andrew, felt right. She had spent so much time exploring places alone, wrapped in her own thoughts and curiosities. But, for the first time, she realized how much more meaningful it could be to share the experience with someone who saw the world the way she did. She smiled. "Yeah, I'd like that." Andrew smiled back. And just like that, a new journey had begun.